Hey folks, welcome into the News 12 Now desk. Thanks for joining us here on this Monday, this President's Day. If you've been keeping up with the news at all, you've heard the recent news of former President Jimmy Carter opting for hospice care at 98 years old, going to live out the rest of his days with his family. So we are joined now by Dr. John Hayes, professor over at Augusta University. Dr. Hayes, thank you for joining us here today to kind of give a little bit of insight on the former president. If you just real quick want to introduce yourself and tell us what you do over at AU.
Certainly. So I'm John Hayes. I am Associate Professor of History at Augusta University, and my specialty is 20th century U.S. history, but with a focus on the South.
There you go. That's perfect for what we're talking about here. So we've got Jimmy Carter, one of the most recognizable people in the world when it comes to both his presidency and then also his post-presidency life. And when you look at kind of his body of work as a whole, it's super interesting to look at because he's this, he's this grassroots guy from Georgia, from southern Georgia, a farmer, a military man. Then he becomes a politician, spends time in the Georgia Senate, in the governor's office, and then of course as the president, and then post-presidency he becomes this charitable person, Habitat for Humanity. That's kind of how we know him now. But just what is it about Jimmy Carter, in your opinion, that makes his legacy so strong that people remember him most by?
So if we just zoom in on Georgia for a second, obviously he's a figure of national and global importance, but if we just zoom in on Georgia, in his inaugural address as governor, that would have been early in 1971, he says very, very plainly, the time for racial discrimination is over. That was the first time in literally 100 years exactly that a governor of Georgia had spoken openly against racism. It literally had been 100 years. And so that sets a tone for Carter as governor, that marks a real change in state politics, at least at the level of just kind of rhetoric and symbolism. But rhetoric and symbolism is important. I'd add a little bit on that it's with Carter as governor that for the first time ever, the portraits of Black Georgians are, you know, special Black Georgians are placed in the state Capitol building. And so Martin Luther King, who at that, this is the early 70s, so only recently assassinated, Henry McNeil Turner, who was a major legislator at the state level in Reconstruction, and then Augusta's own Lucy Craft Laney, educator and NAACP founder. So it's Carter's doing things as governor that mark a real changing of the guard in state politics. If we go to national politics and really global politics, as many have noted, this is not nothing original here. It's primarily Carter's post-presidential diplomatic work through the Carter Center that's established in the early 80s, that created the stature that we, the legacy that we're familiar with now. His presidency is, I mean, he's a moderate Democrat at the policy level. There's some macroeconomic changes in the 70s that make it a difficult time for really kind of anybody. Most historians I know would not look back on the Carter presidency as something all that worthy of praise. But the diplomatic work post-presidency for decades, that's why he won the Nobel Peace Prize in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and kind of let's go back to what you said first about the racial discrimination is done. How did that shape Georgia politics and national politics to some degree moving forward? Because like you said, this is something that hadn't been done before, the century before he went out and said that in his inaugural address.
Yes, I mean, this can be difficult for people to imagine now with the politics that we have today. But at that point in the South, the Democratic Party, I mean, that's the establishment party. They're so, I mean, they're not 100% dominant, but they're the dominant party. And so what starts happening in state politics is as you see a return to the electorate of Black voters, and you see rising number of Black elected officials. They're Democrats, but they're working with what had been the establishment party of white Democrats. So if you look at the Democratic Party at the state level in the 70s and 80s into the 90s. It's a party that had been the good old boy party, but it's trying to absorb civil rights change. This is before, and it's kind of an uneasy setup. This is before the Republican Party at the state level, and this will be true in other southern states, really kind of develops as a robust institution that we know today of the last 20, 25 years or so.
It almost sounds like he was too nice or not political enough to be president, but that's why he succeeds so much in the post-presidential career that he's had, because he's been able to do all this charitable work, because that's kind of more of the person he is. That's just how this is how it seems from doing all the research I've done. Obviously, wasn't there at the time, didn't live through it all. But do you think that what he's done post-presidency kind of comes from where he was growing up? Like I said, from humble beginnings. His father passed away when I think he was in his 30s, when Jimmy Carter was in his 30s, kind of takes over a little bit of inheritance, and then he and Rosalind kind of build up from nothing and create this life for themselves and their family. Do you think that kind of shaped who he is now post-presidency?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just for clarity, I mean, a lot of people say he's a peanut farmer. I mean, he owned an agribusiness operation. So literally was Jimmy out there like in the peanut field, I mean, he's the owner of a small agribusiness operation, and the family, by the standards of the time, they're middle class. I mean, they own land, they have tenant farmers. He goes off to college, gets a military commission, all this. I mean, they're small town. I mean, very small town, middle class. But yes, just there was a great article in the Washington Post maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, this extended piece on just his post-presidential, just personal life. And it's just the way he just lives very modestly. And it's well worth, I mean, I don't remember the name of the piece, well worth looking up, but just sort of comparing him with what other post-presidents have done in their post-presidency. His life is like meticulously modest and humble. And just to give you a personal example of that, I've seen him in person 3 times from a distance. So I mean, I think I just waved at him. One was at a Baptist meeting, basically a meeting of kind of liberal white Baptists in North Carolina. Another was at a Bob Dylan concert where he was sitting just up in the balcony, not down in the front row, just up in the balcony. Somebody gets up and goes to, and an entourage gets up with them. And I realized, wait, that's Jimmy Carter. And then the funniest of the stories, this is a friend and I were down in Plains in the summer of 2018. We did these photographic road trips. I mean, this is July down in Plains. It was like 95 degrees, 99% humidity, and it was just scorching. And it was about 5:45. We're pulling out of PM. We're pulling out of Plains. And it's a 2-lane road that kind of leads out of Plains. It's US 280, I believe. And as we're driving past the Carter house, which is this 1960s ranch house, I mean, it's very modest, like my grandparents used to live in. We get past that, then we see 2 kind of middle-aged guys dressed in just like sneakers and t-shirts. And then in front of them, we see 2 elderly people. This is on the side of the road, walking. And I can text you the picture later. It's so ridiculous. Walking, long sleeve shirts, long pants, and it's Jimmy and Rosalind. And so I very quickly grabbed my phone, took a terrible picture, but I was just like, this is a former president. This is 5:45 in the evening on a Sunday evening. Maybe he was going to the dinner at there was a senior center a few ways, a little bit down the road. Maybe he was going there. But it's just like, this is just this said something about just sort of his character as a person.
Yeah. That's Jimmy Carter, right?
Yeah.
I actually this is kind of an out there tangent story as well. But when I was in high school, we had a substitute teacher who was a former Secret Service agent, and he said Jimmy Carter was very difficult to be a Secret Service agent for sometimes, because he was such a man of the people. He would want to carry his own bags through the airport. Yeah. Obviously, you can't do that as president, so they used to give him empty luggage. He wanted to get out of the car and walk through crowds in the middle of the street, and it's like you just can't do that.
Yeah.
But again, that's just kind of who Jimmy Carter is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah, and it was hilarious. I mean, the two Secret Service agents are like stumbling along, sweating profusely. They're Jimmy and Rosalind walking along. It's just like, you can't make this up. So,
yeah, I think those are really the big questions I had for you there. Was there anything else that you had that you wanted to add?
his state importance, that really, again, it's more, it's a lot of it, it's symbolism, but it's not meaningless symbolism. That really signaled a new direction in state politics. And a new direction for Democratic governors that came after him, which we had up in, for the next 30 years. It was all Democratic governors, but symbolically embracing civil rights. Yeah, that's a new direction.
Yeah, definitely shaped the future of politics and civil rights, and so much of what we see now in Georgia shaped by Jimmy Carter. So, Dr. Hayes, we appreciate the time. Thank you so much for joining us here. And folks, thanks for tuning in here, and we will have more updates on Jimmy Carter throughout the day as we get them.